What are some cultural differences you have noticed between your country and others?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed any cultural differences between your country and others?
Yeah, definitely. For example, in my country, it is common to take off your shoes before entering someone's home. But in other countries, it is not a big deal if you keep them on.
Oh, I see. In my country, we shake hands when we meet someone for the first time. But in some other countries, they bow or even kiss on the cheek.
That's interesting. Also, in my country, we eat with our hands on certain occasions. But in some other countries, it is considered impolite to do so.
Yeah, I've heard of that. It's amazing how different cultures have different customs and traditions. It's fascinating to learn about them.
Have you ever experienced culture shock?
Hey Abby, have you ever experienced culture shock before?
Yeah, when I first moved to Japan for a year of study abroad. The customs and traditions were so different from what I was used to.
I know what you mean. I felt the same way when I traveled to India. The food, the language, even the way people interacted with each other was all so new to me.
Exactly. It can be overwhelming at first, but I found it really rewarding to learn about a new culture and way of life.
Yeah, me too. It's amazing how much we can learn and grow when we step out of our comfort zones and experience something completely different.
How do you adapt to different cultural norms when traveling?
Hey Abby, do you have any tips for adapting to cultural norms when traveling?
Yeah, definitely. One thing I always do is research the culture before I go. That way, I know what's considered appropriate and what's not.
That's a good idea. Do you have any other tips?
Sure, try to observe locals and follow their lead. If they take off their shoes before entering a house, do the same. And always be respectful, even if you don't agree with their customs.
Okay, got it. Thanks for the advice, Abby.
No problem. Traveling is all about experiencing new things and learning about different cultures.
What are some common stereotypes about your culture?
Hey Abby, have you ever faced any stereotypes about our culture?
Yeah, all the time. People often assume that I'm good at math and science because I'm Indian.
Oh man, I know what you mean. People always think that just because I'm British, I'm super posh and always drinking tea.
Haha, I've also heard people say that all Indians are vegetarians and we only eat spicy food.
And I've heard people say that all British people have bad teeth.
That's ridiculous. But it just goes to show how much stereotypes can distort the way people see us.
Yeah, we just have to keep breaking down those stereotypes and show people that we're more than just cultural cliches.
Do you think language influences culture or vice versa?
Hey Abby, do you think language influences culture or the other way around?
That's an interesting question. I think both influence each other. Language reflects the culture and the way people communicate with each other, and culture shapes the language by creating new words and expressions.
Yeah, I agree. For example, some languages have specific words that don't exist in other languages, which reflects their unique cultural concepts.
Exactly. And also, the way people express themselves in a language can affect how their culture is perceived by others.
That's true. Language can also create stereotypes and prejudices if people use it in a negative way.
Yes, that's why it's important to be aware of the power of language and use it in a respectful and inclusive way.
How do you celebrate holidays in your culture?
Hey Abby, how do you celebrate holidays in your culture?
Well, it depends on the holiday. But usually, we start off by cleaning our houses, and then we prepare traditional food and invite family and friends over.
That sounds nice. What kind of food do you prepare?
For Eid, we usually make biryani, kebabs, and sweet dishes like sheer kurma. And for Christmas, we make roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie.
Oh, I love pumpkin pie. Do you exchange gifts during the holidays?
Yes, we do. For Eid, we usually give money or gifts to the children, and for Christmas, We exchange gifts with family and close friends.
That's great. I love learning about different cultures and their holiday traditions.
What is considered polite in your culture?
Hey Abby, have you noticed how different cultures have different ways of showing politeness?
Yeah, definitely. In my culture, it's considered polite to take off your shoes before entering someone's house.
Really? In my culture, it's considered impolite to show up at someone's house empty-handed. You're expected to bring a small gift or some kind of offering.
That's interesting. In my culture, it's also considered polite to address elders by their title or honorific, rather than just their first name.
That's true in my culture as well. We also tend to use a lot of formal language when speaking to someone of higher status or authority.
It's so fascinating how these small gestures and behaviors can make such a big difference in showing respect and politeness.
Definitely. It's always important to be aware of cultural differences and adapt accordingly.
Do you prefer individualism or collectivism?
Hey, Abby. Do you prefer individualism or collectivism?
That's a tough one. But, personally, I lean more towards individualism.
Really? I thought you were always into teamwork and group activities.
Well, I do enjoy working with others, but I also believe that each person should have the freedom to think and act on their own. What about you?
I'm more of a collectivist, to be honest. I think that working together towards a common goal can achieve great things.
That's true, and I can see how collectivism can be beneficial in certain situations. But I still believe that individuality is important. What are some similarities you have noticed between different cultures?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures can still share similarities?
Yeah, definitely. For example, hospitality is an important value in many cultures. People want to make guests feel welcome and comfortable.
Absolutely. And most cultures have some form of traditional clothing or dress that represents their heritage.
And many cultures have their own unique forms of dance or music.
Right, and food is another big one. Every culture has their own traditional dishes and ingredients they use.
It's amazing how different we can be, yet still have some commonalities.
Yeah, it just goes to show that despite our differences, we're more alike than we think.
How do you address someone from a different culture?
Hey Abby, I noticed that we have a lot of international students in our class. How do you address them properly?
Great question. It depends on their culture. For example, if they are from Japan, it's respectful to use their last name instead of their first name.
Oh, I see. What about if they're from a country that I'm not familiar with?
In that case, it's always better to ask them directly. They will appreciate that you're making an effort to be respectful of their culture.
That makes sense. I don't want to accidentally offend anyone by addressing them the wrong way.
Exactly. It's always good to be mindful of cultural differences and show respect to others.
What is your opinion on cultural appropriation?
Hey Abby, I was wondering what your opinion is on cultural appropriation.
Honestly, I think it's a sensitive topic. As a white person, I don't want to offend anyone, but I also don't want to be afraid to appreciate other cultures. It's a fine line.
I get what you mean. I feel like there's a difference between appreciation and appropriation. Like, if you're wearing traditional clothing from another culture without understanding its significance, that's appropriation.
Yeah, I agree. And it's important to listen to people from those cultures and understand their perspective on it.
Definitely. It's all about respect and understanding.
Have you ever experienced discrimination based on your culture?
Hey Abby, have you ever experienced discrimination based on your culture?
Yeah, I have. It's not something I like to talk about, but it happens.
I'm sorry to hear that. What kind of discrimination have you faced?
Well, people have made fun of my accent and the food I eat. They assume things about me just because of my culture.
That's really unfair. I can't believe people still act like that.
It's frustrating, but I try not to let it get to me. I know who I am and where I come from, and that's all that matters.
Absolutely. We should all be proud of our heritage and celebrate our differences.
How do different cultures approach religion?
Hey Abby, have you ever wondered how different cultures approach religion?
Yeah, actually, I have. Some cultures have multiple gods, while others believe in one supreme deity. And some don't really have a religion at all.
Yeah, it's interesting how there are so many different beliefs and practices out there. For example, in Hinduism, cows are considered sacred and are not to be eaten or harmed, but in other cultures, beef is a dietary staple.
That's true. And in some cultures, like Buddhism, the focus is on personal spiritual development rather than belief in a higher power.
Exactly. It's important to respect and understand different cultures and their beliefs, even if we don't necessarily agree with them.
Definitely. It's all part of being open-minded and accepting of diversity.
What is a tradition in your culture that you love?
Hey Abby, what's your favorite tradition in our culture?
That's a tough one. But I think I love the pista ng mga kabataan.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I remember joining that when I was younger. It's like a sports festival for the youth, right?
Yes, exactly. It's a great way for kids to showcase their athletic skills and bond with other kids in the community.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not just about sports, there are also cultural activities and performances, right?
Right. It's a celebration of our culture and heritage as well. It's always fun to watch the performances and learn more about our traditions.
I couldn't agree more. It's great that we have these kinds of events to keep our culture alive and thriving.
How do different cultures approach food and mealtime customs?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach food and mealtime customs in their own unique way?
Yeah, I have. For example, in Japan, it's considered polite to slurp your noodles loudly while eating.
Really? That's interesting. In some Arab cultures, the host will keep refilling your plate until you have had enough.
Oh, I didn't know that. In China, it's common to share dishes family style and eat with chopsticks.
I see. In some Western countries, people use utensils like forks, knives, and spoons to eat, and they have specific etiquette rules like not talking with your mouth full.
Yeah, that's true. And some people eat with their hands in certain cultures too, like in India and Ethiopia.
Exactly. It's fascinating to see how food and mealtime customs vary across different cultures.
What is a cultural taboo in your country? Hey Abby, do you know any cultural taboos in our country?
Yeah, there are plenty. For instance, it's considered rude to burp or fart in public.
Yeah, I know that one. But what about eating with your left hand?
Oh yeah, that's another one. In our culture, the left hand is considered unclean, so we use the right hand to eat.
Interesting. Are there any other taboos that I should be aware of?
Well, it's not exactly a taboo, but it's impolite to point your feet at someone. We consider feet to be dirty, so it's best to keep them pointed away from others.
I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for enlightening me, Abby.
How do you feel about interracial relationships and marriages?
Hey Abby, what's your take on interracial relationships and marriages?
I don't see any problem with it. Love is love, and it doesn't matter what race or ethnicity you are.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think people should be free to love whomever they choose, regardless of their skin color.
Exactly. Besides, mixed-race couples can bring different perspectives and cultures into their relationship, which can be enriching.
Absolutely. I think diversity is something to be celebrated, not feared.
What is a stereotype about a culture that you think is unfair?
Hey Abby, have you ever encountered any stereotypes about your culture that you find unfair?
Yeah, there's one that really bugs me. People think that all Indians are cheap and obsessed with money.
That's ridiculous. I mean, I'm from England and people stereotype us as being uptight and reserved, but that's not true for everyone.
Exactly. Stereotypes are harmful because they make us seem like we're all the same, when in reality we're all unique individuals.
So true. I think it's important to challenge these stereotypes whenever we can.
Definitely. It's up to us to educate others and break down these harmful misconceptions.
What are some cultural norms that you find difficult to understand?
Hey Abby, have you ever been to Japan?
No, I haven't. Why do you ask?
Well, I recently watched a documentary about their culture, and there are some norms that I find difficult to understand.
Like what?
For example, taking off your shoes before entering someone's home. I understand it's a sign of respect, but it seems like a hassle.
Yeah, I get what you mean. But it's actually very common in many Asian countries. In fact, in some places, you have to take off your shoes before entering any building, including schools and offices.
Really? That seems extreme.
Well, it's just a cultural norm that they follow. It's important to be respectful of other people's cultures, even if it's different from our own.
Do you believe in cultural relativism? Hey Abby, have you heard of the concept of cultural relativism?
I have. It's the idea that different cultures have their own unique values and beliefs, right?
Exactly. And that those values and beliefs should be respected and understood within their own cultural context.
I think I believe in it to some extent. I mean, who are we to judge another culture's practices if we don't understand the reasons behind them?
Yeah, that's my point of view too. It doesn't mean we have to agree with everything, but at least we should try to understand where they are coming from.
Definitely. I think it's important to have an open mind and not impose our own cultural values onto others.
Agreed. It's all about respecting diversity and embracing differences.
What is a cultural difference that you find intriguing?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures have their unique ways of greeting each other?
Yeah, I have. For instance, in Japan, people bow to show respect, whereas in some African countries, people touch their chests with their right hands.
Exactly. In my country, Colombia, we greet people with a kiss on the cheek, but it's not like a real kiss, just a touch of cheeks.
Oh, I see. In my culture, we usually shake hands or hug, but it depends on the situation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Another cultural difference that I find intriguing is the way people perceive time. For example, in some African countries, it's common to be late for meetings or appointments, whereas in Germany, being punctual is highly valued.
Yeah, I've heard of that too. It's amazing how different cultures can have such contrasting views and practices.
How do different cultures approach education?
Hey Abby, have you ever thought about how different cultures approach education?
Yeah, I have actually. For example, I know that in some Asian countries, education is highly valued and their curriculum is extremely rigorous.
That's true. But did you know that in some African countries, education is seen as a way to escape poverty and support one's family?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and in some Latin American countries, education is viewed as a way to gain social status and climb up the social ladder.
Interesting. I guess it just goes to show that education means different things to different people, depending on their culture and circumstances.
What is a cultural value that you hold dear?
Hey Abby, what's a cultural value that you hold dear?
For me, it's the value of respect for elders. In my culture, we believe that elders have a lot of wisdom and experience that we can learn from, so we treat them with a lot of reverence and respect.
That's really interesting. In my culture, family is really important. We believe in taking care of our family members, no matter what.
Yeah, I think that's a great value too. Family is important to me too, but I think respecting elders is just as important.
I can definitely see why you think that. It's always great to learn about other cultures and their values, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's important to be open to learning about different cultures and respecting their values, even if they're different from our own.
How do different cultures approach gender roles?
Hey Abby, have you ever thought about how different cultures approach gender roles?
Yeah, I have actually. It's interesting to see how different societies view the roles of men and women.
Definitely. Like in some cultures, men are expected to be the breadwinners and provide for their families, while women take care of the household and children.
And in other cultures, it's the opposite, where women are expected to work outside the house and men take care of the children and household chores.
Yeah, and then there are cultures where gender roles are more fluid and people are allowed to express themselves however they want.
It's definitely a complex topic, but it's important to understand and respect different cultural perspectives.
What is a cultural practice that you find uncomfortable?
Hey Abby, have you ever come across any cultural practices that make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, actually, there are a few. One that really stands out for me is the tradition of eating dogs in some countries.
I know what you mean. I find that really hard to stomach too. But, in some cultures, eating dogs is seen as completely normal.
I get that. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around it. Another thing that I find uncomfortable is the practice of female genital mutilation.
Yes. That's a big one for me too. It's such a brutal, unnecessary practice. It's sad to think that so many girls are still subjected to it.
Do you think globalization is promoting or erasing cultural differences?
Hey Abby, have you noticed how everything seems to be the same nowadays? Like, you can find the same stores and restaurants in every country.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's all because of globalization.
But do you think it's promoting or erasing cultural differences?
Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. On one hand, we're all exposed to different cultures and ideas from around the world. But on the other hand, it's easy for people to forget their own culture and traditions when everything around them is so similar.
That's true. I guess it depends on how people choose to embrace or reject globalization.
What is a cultural festival that you have attended and enjoyed?
Hey Abby, have you ever attended a cultural festival?
Yes, I have. I went to the Chinese New Year festival last year and it was amazing.
That sounds cool. What did you like most about it?
The dragon dance was my favorite part. It was so colorful and impressive. And the food was delicious too.
I see. I went to the Diwali festival last year and it was great. There were lights everywhere and people were dancing and singing.
Diwali sounds interesting. I've never been to that one. Did you try any new foods?
Yes, I tried samosas and they were delicious. I also got to watch a Bollywood dance performance.
Wow, that sounds really fun. I'll have to check it out next year.
Definitely. It's always great to experience and learn about different cultures.
Have you ever experienced reverse culture shock?
Hey Abby, have you ever experienced reverse culture shock?
Yeah, man. When I came back from Japan, it was really hard to adjust to American culture again.
I feel you. When I came back from studying abroad in Spain, it was weird to not have a siesta every day.
Exactly. And people here don't seem to appreciate good food as much as they do in Europe.
Yeah, and the whole work-life balance is totally different. It took me a while to get used to working more than 8 hours a day.
Totally. But eventually, you get back into the swing of things.
What is a cultural difference that has caused a misunderstanding or miscommunication?
Hey Abby, I noticed that you didn't finish your plate of food. Is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't like the taste of it.
I see. You know, in my culture, it's considered impolite to leave food on your plate. It's seen as a sign of disrespect to the person who cooked it.
Really? In my culture, it's actually considered impolite to finish everything on your plate. It's a way of showing that you're satisfied and don't need any more.
That's interesting. I had no idea there were such differences in food culture.
How do different cultures approach time management?
Hey Abby, do you have a minute?
Sure, what's up?
I was just wondering how your culture approaches time management. I know in my culture we're very punctual and time conscious.
Well, in my culture, we have a more relaxed approach to time. We don't really stress about being exactly on time for everything.
Oh really? So, how do you guys manage to get things done on time?
It's more about completing tasks within a certain time frame rather than meeting exact deadlines. It's also common to be fashionably late for social events.
Interesting. I guess it just goes to show how different cultures can have different values and priorities.
Definitely. It's important to be mindful and respectful of those cultural differences too.
What is a cultural practice that you wish was more widely adopted?
Hey Abby, have you ever heard of the cultural practice of taking shoes off before entering someone's home?
Yeah, I have. I think it's a common practice in some Asian countries.
That's right. I think it's a great practice that should be adopted worldwide. It keeps floors clean and germ-free.
I agree. It also shows respect for the homeowner's cleanliness and helps to maintain a peaceful environment.
Absolutely. I have started implementing it in my own home, and my guests have been receptive to it.
Maybe we should start a campaign to spread this practice across the country. It would definitely make a positive impact on the environment.
Yes. I'm down for that. Let's spread the word.
How do different cultures approach art and aesthetics?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach art in their unique way?
Yeah, I have. For example, in Japan, they focus on minimalism and simplicity, while in India, they use a lot of vibrant colors and intricate designs.
That's true. Even within a culture, there can be different aesthetics. Like in China, traditional art is very detailed and realistic, but there's also a modern style that's more abstract.
Absolutely. And in some African cultures, art is not just about aesthetics, but it also has a functional purpose.
Yeah, I've seen that. It's amazing how different cultures can express themselves through art in such distinct ways.
What is a cultural custom that you have adopted from another culture?
Hey Abby, have you ever adopted a cultural custom from another country?
Yeah man, I started practicing yoga, which originated from India. It has helped me with my flexibility and stress levels.
That's cool. I've started drinking tea, which is a big part of British culture. I used to be a coffee person, but after trying different types of tea, I started enjoying it more.
I've also started celebrating Chinese New Year. I went to a parade last year, and it was amazing to see all the dragon dances and fireworks.
That's awesome. I've been to a few Diwali celebrations with my Indian friends. I love the colorful decorations and the food is always delicious.
It's cool how we can adopt different customs and traditions from around the world and make them a part of our own lives.
Yeah, it makes the world a more interesting and diverse place.
What is a cultural practice that you have difficulty accepting?
Abby, have you ever come across a cultural practice that you find difficult to accept?
Yeah, sure. There's one practice that I really can't wrap my head around.
What is it?
It's the practice of eating dogs in some Asian countries.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's really hard to accept for me too. But I guess it's a matter of perspective. For them, it's a traditional and normal thing.
I understand that, but it still bothers me to think of dogs being treated that way. And besides, we have different cultural practices too, which might be hard for them to accept.
That's true. It's important to keep an open mind and respect different cultures, even if we don't agree with their practices.
How do different cultures approach relationships and marriage?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach relationships and marriage?
Yeah, definitely. In my culture, it's more common to have arranged marriages, where parents set up the match.
Really? That's interesting. In my culture, It's more about falling in love and then getting married.
Yeah, I've heard that's how it is in Western cultures. In my culture, the focus is more on the family and making sure the match makes sense financially and socially.
I can see how that would be important, but it's also important to follow your heart, you know?
Of course, but in our culture, marriage is not just about two individuals, it's about two families coming together. It's a big decision that affects everyone.
That's a good point. It's interesting to see how different cultures approach relationships and marriage in their own unique way.
What is a cultural difference that has led to an interesting conversation?
Hey, Abby, have you ever noticed how we use different hand gestures to communicate?
What do you mean?
Well, for example, when I'm talking to someone and want to say okay, I make a circle with my thumb and forefinger. But I've noticed that some of my international friends use a different gesture. Like a thumbs up.
Yeah, that's true. In my culture, a thumbs up means good job. But I've also seen people use the okay gesture but with 3 fingers instead of 2.
Oh, I didn't know that. It's so interesting how something as simple as a hand gesture can have different meanings in different cultures.
Yeah, it really is. And it can lead to misunderstandings if you're not aware of the differences.
How do different cultures approach social hierarchy and status?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach social hierarchy and status?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In my culture, elders are given a lot of respect and are considered the authority figures.
That's similar to mine, but we also place a lot of importance on titles and job positions. People with higher positions are seen as more important.
In my friend's culture, they don't really have a hierarchy. Everyone is considered equal and decisions are made through group consensus.
Wow, that's completely different from what I'm used to. I can't imagine not having a clear leader or authority figure.
Yeah, it's definitely an adjustment. But it works for them and they seem to be happy with it.
What is a cultural practice that you believe is outdated?
Hey Abby, have you ever thought about how some cultural practices are outdated?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like arranged marriages, for instance. It's an old tradition that doesn't make sense in modern times.
Exactly. Another one is the gender roles that limit women from pursuing certain careers. Everyone should have equal opportunities to follow their dreams.
Agreed. And the idea that men should be the sole breadwinners in the family is also outdated. It puts a lot of pressure on them and ignores the fact that women can be just as successful.
Absolutely. It's important to recognize that cultural practices can change over time and that we should embrace new ideas that promote equality and diversity.
What is a cultural concept or word that you find difficult to translate?
Hey Abby, have you ever come across a cultural concept or word that you find difficult to translate?
Yeah, I have. In my culture, there is a word called hygge that's hard to explain.
Oh, I've heard of that. It's a Danish word, right?
Yes, it is. It can be translated as coziness or comfort, but it's more than that. It's a feeling of warmth and contentment that comes from being with loved ones, enjoying good food and drinks, and creating a cozy atmosphere.
That sounds nice. I think I understand what you mean, but it's hard to put into words.
Exactly. It's one of those things that you have to experience to fully understand.
How do different cultures approach fashion and clothing?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach fashion and clothing?
Yeah, definitely. For example, in some Asian cultures, wearing a mask when you're sick is seen as a polite thing to do.
That's interesting. I've also noticed that in some African cultures, bright and bold patterns are commonly worn during celebrations.
And don't forget about the traditional dress in India, like the sari and salwar kameez. It's so colorful and intricate.
Right, and in Western cultures, there's a lot of variation too. Some people prefer more casual and comfortable clothing, while others like to dress up and wear more formal outfits.
It really is fascinating how culture can influence fashion and clothing choices.
What is a cultural difference that you find challenging to navigate? Hey, Abby. Have you ever found it challenging to navigate cultural differences?
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I moved to Japan, it was tough to get used to their bowing etiquette.
Oh, I can understand that. For me, it's the different meal traditions. Like in China, it's polite to slurp your soup.
That's interesting. In my culture, it's impolite to make too much noise when eating. Have you ever accidentally offended someone because of a cultural difference?
Yeah, actually. When I went to India, I didn't know that showing the soles of your feet is considered rude.
Ah, I see. It's important to do some research before traveling to a new country to avoid unintentional disrespect.
How do different cultures approach technology?
Hey, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach technology in their daily lives?
Yeah, definitely. For example, in Japan, there's a big emphasis on using technology for efficiency and convenience. They've got everything from high-tech toilets to self-driving taxis.
That's true. And in India, people tend to use technology more for communication and social connections. I remember when I visited, people were always on their phones, sending messages and making calls.
And what about in the US?
Well, I think we're kind of in the middle. We use technology for both efficiency and social connections, but there's also a big emphasis on innovation and pushing the limits of what technology can do.
What is a cultural value that you disagree with?
Hey Abby, what's up?
Nothing much, just thinking about cultural values. Do you believe in arranged marriages?
No, I don't. I believe in choosing your own partner.
Yeah, same here. Actually, I think it's unfair to force someone to marry someone they don't love.
Absolutely. Love and compatibility are the most important things in a relationship. I don't think arranged marriages can guarantee that.
I think it's a cultural value that needs to change. People should have the freedom to choose who they want to be with.
I couldn't agree more. This is the 21st century, arranged marriages don't work anymore.
Yeah, we need to break free from the traditional mindset and embrace modern values.
What is a cultural custom that you find fascinating?
Hey Abby, have you ever come across any cultural customs that you find fascinating?
Yeah, I have. In Japan, tipping is considered rude. Instead, people show their gratitude by saying arigatou gozaimasu, which means thank you very much.
That's interesting. In my country, India, guests are treated as gods. We believe that serving guests is equivalent to serving God.
Wow, that's amazing. In my country, Nigeria, we have a custom called igboboju, which is the Yoruba term for the naming ceremony of a child. It's a big deal and celebrated with much pomp and ceremony.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I love learning about different cultural customs.
How do different cultures approach leisure time and relaxation?
Hey Abby, do you have any plans for the weekend?
Not really, just planning on chilling at home and watching movies. What about you?
Same here, I need some leisure time this week. You know, back in my home country, we have a siesta every day. We take a break in the afternoon to relax and recharge.
Really? That sounds nice. In my culture, we have a similar concept called a fika, where we take a coffee break and socialize with friends or coworkers.
Yeah, I've heard of that. It's interesting how different cultures approach leisure time and relaxation.
Definitely. It's important to take a break and de-stress, no matter what culture you come from.
What is a cultural difference that has taught you something new? Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how people from different cultures have different eating habits?
Yeah, I have. What do you mean exactly?
Well, for example, in Japan it's considered rude to leave any food on your plate. It's a sign of disrespect to the chef.
Interesting. In my culture, it's polite to leave a little bit of food on your plate to show that you're satisfied.
Wow, I never knew that. It's amazing how something as simple as finishing your food can mean different things in different cultures.
Absolutely. It just shows how important it is to be aware of cultural differences and to try to understand them.
How do different cultures approach healthcare and medicine? Hey, Abby. Have you ever wondered how different cultures approach healthcare and medicine?
Yeah, it's interesting how they have different methods and beliefs.
Exactly. For example, in Chinese culture, traditional medicine is commonly used alongside Western medicine.
That's true. And in India, Ayurvedic medicine is a popular way to treat illnesses.
In some African cultures, they use herbs and plants for healing purposes. And in Native American culture, they use sweat lodges and ceremonies to heal the body and mind.
Wow, I had no idea. It's amazing how diverse healthcare practices can be.
Yeah, it just goes to show how important it is to understand and respect different cultures and their beliefs.
What is a cultural practice that you see changing in the future?
Hey Abby, have you noticed how people's eating habits have changed recently?
Yeah, like what?
Well, I mean, people are becoming more health conscious and a lot of them are turning vegan or vegetarian.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. I've seen a lot of restaurants now offering vegan options.
Exactly. And I think it's going to continue to grow in the future. People are becoming more aware of the impact of their food choices on the environment and their health.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting to see how cultural practices change over time.
Yeah, and it's a good thing too. We need to adapt and change with the times.
What is a cultural difference that you have embraced?
Hey Abby, have you ever embraced a cultural difference before?
Yes, I have. I used to find it strange that people eat with their hands in some cultures, but now I embrace it.
That's great. For me, it was the importance of family in some cultures. I used to be all about independence, but now I see the beauty in being close with family.
Yeah, family is important in my culture too. It's amazing how different cultures have different values and beliefs.
Definitely. I think it's important to be open-minded and respectful of other cultures.
I couldn't agree more.
How do different cultures approach communication and language?
Hey Abby, have you ever noticed how different cultures approach communication and language?
Yeah, definitely. I've lived in a few different countries and it's always interesting to see how people interact and express themselves.
Right? Like in some cultures, it's common to speak in a very indirect way to show respect, while in others, it's considered rude to not speak directly and assertively.
Yeah, and there are also differences in nonverbal communication, like gestures, facial expressions, and even eye contact. Some cultures use a lot of physical touch while others don't.
Absolutely. And don't forget about the different language structures and grammar rules. Some languages have more emphasis on verb tense, while others have more emphasis on gender and formality.
It's all so fascinating, isn't it?
Definitely. I think it's important to be aware of these differences when communicating with people from different cultures.